Nigel Farage has threatened to launch a private prosecution against the men who punched police officers at Manchester Airport. Is it true or is it false?
It is true, and I'm very glad he's done it. And it's about time that those people who behaved in such an aggressive, I must
be careful
of what I say, an appalling manner are done. Are we so frightened in this country of upsetting somebody because they may have come from a different culture? If you want to come and live in this country, you want to come and live in this country, and attacking the police is not on. I know one of them responded quite physically, but to be absolutely fair, so they should have. A policewoman's nose was broken. She was knocked to the ground. The other two policemen were knocked to the ground. How do you want them to respond? Get up and say, oh, I'm so sorry. I really don't want to hurt you. If you could just stand over there, we could. Don't be ridiculous. They should not be out of prison now. They should be locked up.
Of course, the other point to make, Tom, there is a really easy defence for the police. The minute you get into an altercation and somebody pushes your firearms out of its holster, you can use unlimited force to restrain them.
Well, once the firearm's out the holster, it can be used by the people you're trying to...
It's exactly why you can use unlimited force.
But I read the letter I think Nigel Farage and his Reform MP colleagues wrote into, I think it was the Home Secretary.
Yes, it was.
And it was essentially all about this two-tier care situation, this two-tier policing.
Yeah.
And making the point that absolutely these people are still walking the streets free, and meanwhile folks who've been putting things on Facebook are locked up.
See, Pete, political strategist moment.
Yeah.
I think Farage has got this wrong because the problem is, if he launched a private prosecution, the CPS will take it over. What he should do, if he's really clever, is put down a parliamentary motion to convict them and sentence them to 10 years in prison. Because actually, he could pass legislation that puts them in prison, call them to the bar of the House and hear the trial in the House of Commons.
Yeah, that would have been the smart.
That would be expert level, though.
Yeah, but that's the thing. This is why I don't think this is a serious move. I really don't, because what they should have done is announced private prosecution and a whole load of reforms to the CPS so this never happens again. That is the serious move. That is the position of a future government and a future Prime Minister, not, yet again, reform being a reactionary force. This is my problem, like I've always said with reform. They have to broaden their appeal, and this was their chance to do it, and I don't really think that they've actually grasped this in the way that they physically...
But I think we need, Tom, to start talking about the Crown Prosecution Service, set up in the 1980s in order to ensure that people are prosecuted in a fair manner, where celebrities and rich people are treated the same as poor people. Every challenge the CPS has faced, it has failed. Jimmy Savile and Mohammed Al-Fayed, plainly two people who, had they not been phenomenally wealthy and powerful, would have been prosecuted. I don't know whether they've been found guilty. We make assumptions, but the case was never tried. And time again, we look at the CPS and say, manifestly, it is not doing what it's supposed to do. Oh, by the way, on both of those major failures, who was the Director of Public Prosecutions? Keir Starmer.
Without fear or favour, that is the whole point. And we think that we, as a country, don't have this sort of secret power behind the throne that's actually pulling the strings. The reality is, there does seem to be a lot of secret power at play, soft power. Certain people can get away with stuff, certain people can't, and it's pretty long-standing.
Yeah. James, for 50 years you've been in this business. I mean, politicians presumably are hopeless compared to what you've seen in the past.
I think so. I mean, I have to say I was around during the reign of Her Royal Highness Margaret Thatcher. And
hang on, weren't you supporting her on a radio station in Yorkshire during the miners' strike?
Yeah.
I mean, people talk about the cancer. Yeah. How are you alive from that?
Well, I don't know, but every couple of weeks Arthur Scargill was a guest on my show. And I think what people don't know is not many people understand the history of recent times. So there were a lot of people who still went to work during the miners' strike because they didn't agree with it, who were treated by the union members appallingly.
Yes.
And I stuck up for them.
Some of them are still frightened today.
Exactly. And the unions, I have no time for unions, I'm sorry. I don't have any time for employers who are not good and look after people. And obviously sometimes they need somebody to represent a lot of people. It's easier. But some of these unions, we have a government now that is, it's run by the unions. It won't get any more money. And that is appalling. But during the time of the miners' strike, I did get quite a lot of stick. Not as much stick as you get about trans issues.
Here he goes.
Here we go. But there we are.
So you had a bit of a run-in with Mick Lynch.
Mick Lynch came into the studio with...
Which is a surprise in of itself.
It's an act with him, OK. And so he came into the studio and I got really annoyed with the rubbish he was talking in support of a terrorist group. You know, even if the BBC don't expect that Hamas are terrorists, they are terrorists. Yes. He came in wearing his ridiculous scarf, wearing a badge, a flag of I think the flag of Palestine. I have nothing against Palestine, Palestinians, or there is no Palestine, obviously, but I have nothing against Palestinians. I feel so sorry for them. And the Lebanese. I feel so sorry that these two countries have been invaded by terrorist scumbags. And the things that people who support Hamas should have seen the celebrations that some of these... Oh, I've got to be so careful. The words I want to... It tunes with hanker. These people celebrated what they did on the 7th of October.
Yes. Well, of course. Well, hang on a second. The BBC did, this week when they, on the 7th, on the first anniversary, they ran a story about how Gaza had suffered. Well, hang on a second. It's not the first anniversary of the war in Gaza. It's the first anniversary of the terrorist atrocity.
Yeah, but
I mean, how egregious is that?
Yeah. But you're quite right. You talk about infiltration of Lebanon, and but then you think about other countries. What about us? How much infiltration has actually happened there? This is what happened since...
But this is the very point of this question, because what we are talking about here is because people are perceived to be from an ethnic minority, they get a different standard of policing. There's now a police investigation into the patriotic soul who released the full video that proved that the police were completely innocent.
I think that's the point, isn't it? That they would rather go after him than actually prosecute the gentleman.
I mean, I'll tell you one thing that I find extraordinary, Pete. One would assume the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, knew the full facts of the case when he went out and defended the assailants.
So you think Andy Burnham is aware of full facts? That seems to be a contradiction.
Yeah, it's a bit difficult.
In all seriousness, sorry,
as mayors go, I don't think he's a bad
I think he's terrible.
Yeah, but you compare him to Sadiq Khan, right? I mean,
I would rather Andy Burnham.
Let's be honest. He had the same kind of reaction to the grooming gangs, where he shut down that investigation pretty quickly, and he had the same. He seems to be on the side of the mob this time, shutting down this investigation into the police.
Well,
let's be honest, there is a political element in this for the Labour Party and for Andy Burnham in general. Let's be real. That voting bloc always votes Labour. He cannot go against them.
I think Andy Burnham is probably one of the more right-wing Labour people that you would meet. As far as I'm concerned, people in grooming gangs, you can bring back capital punishment, as far as I'm concerned. In fact, why don't we bring back capital punishment?
I'm up for it.
Especially with the prisons being overcrowded.
Yeah, we can clear it.
I'll tell you what I proposed previously, and nobody liked this idea, right? 49 criminals on Saturday night, right? The National Lottery Death Show, right? Number 8, it's Myra Hindley.
Well,
Yeah, well, I'm up for presenting it if you want.
I was going to say, just interestingly, Italy are in the middle of introducing a new law to chemically castrate those who are involved in child rape and grooming gangs and things like that.
Good idea.
And it's pretty close to being passed. Obviously, it's Giorgia Meloni. She's not exactly a left-winger. So she's not cuddle. She's not a cuddly one.
She's passing that law to the cry of, oh, you old softy.
So it will be interesting if a lot more European nations shift that
way.
way.
Anyway, I have to say, this is a quiz, and we've departed quite
right
far
away.
from the It's been a tour de force.
That's my
fault.
But anyway,
I'm sorry. James, is it true or false that Nigel Farage is launching a private prosecution against the people who attacked police at Manchester Airport?
Exceptionally true.
It's absolutely true. OK, to Tom, which Prime Minister, I would have known the answer to this. Which Prime Minister did James Whale once take to Stringfellows?
Well, I love the fact that you're asking me my specialised subject. Strip clubs, Stringfellows, all this kind of stuff. I happen to know, did you go on a podcast, James, recently?
That's where you got it from.
I think you were on a podcast in the last week or so, and on that podcast, in fact, one of the advertising points of that podcast was that you revealed.
But it wasn't a strip club.
It wasn't a strip club. Okay.
No.
Right.
It's a pole dancing restaurant come club, a very posh place.
Sounds
And,
quite
it's
good.
very
nice menu, nice wine.
I have to say, Stringfellow was a massive Tory. I've been there loads of times.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And did you enjoy it?
I have to say, I had my favourite table for a while. But look, you know how people talk about gifts and all this? I was the master when I worked in politics. I used to just, I met loads of rich people, always used to go to Stringfellows, and I had a table specially reserved.
Are you a friend of Lord Ali's?
No, but I'm up for it. I'm up for it, right? I'm well up for it.
But I think it was Margaret Thatcher.
Yes.
That was and of course, I mean, there are so many things you can say at that point. No, no, no. Or the lady's not for turning, or...
Ironic for pole dancing.
round and round.
I heard this great story from a Conservative MP friend that he went to Stringfellows not knowing what it was, and he brought the wife of the last viceroy of Egypt, right? this wealthy old lady, you know, I won't say her full name, but anyway, he said we were just tucking into our steaks, and suddenly a woman climbed on the table and took all the clothes off, and I said, "What did you do?" And he said, "We just pretended not to notice."
It wasn't the peppercorn.
Gyrating around.
To be fair, I haven't been there for a long time. Peter died about 10 years ago. And when I was there, Peter rang me. He said, "Will you come and host a table for my friend Margaret?"
Yes.
And I said, "All right, okay," thinking Margaret might be one of the...
Yes.
Whatever. So anyway, I said, "Yeah, I'll be fine." He said, I'm having a fundraising evening for the Tory party." So I got there, and who should be sitting at the table but Margaret Thatcher? And
wow.
That was... he told me beforehand, by the way, that there were going to be no striptease, no pole dancers, none of that. But the waitresses were running around with very little clothing.
And Margaret told, "You'll be very cold unless you put a jumper on there."
She had quite an elderly lady sitting with her, who I later discovered was her PA or secretary.
Yeah, is her name Cynthia or something?
Yeah, I can't remember. It's a long time ago. And the woman said, "Oh, darling, and who are you?" And Margaret said, "Well," I won't do her voice. We said, "Oh, this is James. He's a very good friend of my daughter's." And at the time I was working on a radio station where she was working.
Yes.
And it was just very funny. She was a very, very funny lady.
Yes. But sometimes accidentally. It has to be said.
Accidentally, quite often. And it was a shame the way it all ended. I think we should copy the Americans in the way that a prime minister should only be allowed to run for 2 terms.
Yes.
Because every prime minister that runs for more than 2 terms doesn't seem to do it.
You can't do that in a parliamentary system. That's the problem.
I've got an amazing fact that you will absolutely love.
Go on.
Right. So I went to meet your very good friend Charlie Mullins, and when I said I'm here to meet Mr. Mullins, they said there's nobody booked in called Mr. Mullins. Do you mean Mr. Pimlico? He uses the code name Pimlico to book himself in.
No one will ever get that one.
However, unbelievably, Pimlico was the code name for Margaret Thatcher, a fact I don't believe he knows. So what must happen is he must, when she, shortly after her death, have phoned up various restaurants going, "Can I have a table for Pimlico?" And they're expecting Margaret Thatcher to come from the grave, and Charlie Mullins turns up. It must have caused some confusion. Anyway,
What's your name?
What's my code name?
Yeah.
My code name, I think, is Darth Sonorous.
Right.
The Lord of Noise. Okay.
Always 2.
Right, so I think you have got this right, but which former Prime Minister did James Whale take to Stringfellows?
I think it was Margaret Thatcher.
That's absolutely right.
That was The Woke That Was. Continues after the break. That was The Woke That Was with Andre Walker.
Okay, Peter.
Yes.
Reform UK made history. You're just going to hate this question, aren't you? You're the only. You must be the only person in this building who has no sympathy for Reform UK.
Because I'm the correct person in this building.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Reform UK has made history this week by broadcasting the first ever party political broadcast made with what?
With
sanity, decency, integrity.
all the things that Reform aren't. Oh, that's going to give me a lot of fun on Twitter, isn't it?
Don't worry, they already hate it.
I know, yeah, that's the thing, in for a penny, in for a pound. But no, this is actually quite interesting. They did it with artificial intelligence. So this is like Labour the movie, and it's the first 100 days, and it's like, you know, it's about Keir, the whole free gear Keir and Rachel. I think they call her Rachel Robbers or like Rachel Thieves or something like that. And it's about the winter fuel allowance and immigration and two-tier society, all the issues that they've really kind of just made a complete.
Well, I'll tell you what, given that you've got this right, you can continue talking, but let's watch this clip first.
From the people that sold the gold, we bring you Labour's Britain. Featuring shivering grandparents with no winter fuel allowance, free clothing, glasses, accommodation, and tickets, as long as you're a Labour MP. Over 11,000 illegal migrant crossings and counting. And trade unions getting every pay rise they ever asked for, whilst taxes rise for everyone else. Labour's Britain, starring Free Gear Keir, Robbing Rachel, Red Ed, and Well-Dressed Angela. Produced by Lord Ali, in association with the trade unions. Labour's Britain, out now.
I have to say, I love the fact that Angela Rayner was wearing the bibberwack. Which is an extraordinary piece of... It's interesting that they've had to use AI because they can't use... People saying they can't use original photos.
Under the kind of broadcast rules, which are really strict for these kind of things, they're not allowed to use actual photos of individuals. But just to bring this to reality, I don't want to rain on Reform's parade, but...
Well, you do.
I do.
Yeah. In fact, you do it at every show.
Yeah,
so what?
Because the reality is, if you actually look at Westminster voting intention as of time of recording, with the next Parliament is on track to be a hung Parliament, with Labour having a 1% lead. But actually, it's the Conservatives that get the votes, not Reform. So Reform are expected to go up by 3 MPs, and that's it. So this idea that, you know, they're going to be the next government, it's not really for the...
There's a slight problem with this. And it's a theory that I've advanced multiple times. And even though you're not a fan of Reform and you don't agree with me on a lot of this stuff, you have conceded that there is a geographical boundary to a lot of the Reform votes. So those second places they've got, 98 of them, tend to be in the red wall. So, you know, when people say they'll split the Conservative vote, it is places like Lee and Sheffield and places like that.
Yeah, it is. But the problem is
it's a huge difference as well, what you've just described, Pete, from just 6 weeks ago.
Oh,
and
yeah,
we're 4 years away from the next
100%.
election.
But this kind of argument that they keep advancing, that they're the real Conservatives, they're the real Tory brand, it doesn't make sense when you look at the data.
The problem is, in fact, I'll put this to James, the issue is, you've got these opinion polls, but the opinion polls are national opinion polls. I mean, you know, the SNP does phenomenally well, even though it's low in the percentage points, because by definition, every vote's in Scotland. I think Reform's going to do well the next election.
I think the Tory party is finished. I think they're finished because... excuse me. I don't know who you are, but shut up.
Right, that's who I am.
I don't think the Tory party have much hope because of the old ones fighting with each other, the young ones being slightly stupid. If they had had the gumption to offer Nigel a place and he got in and became leader of the Tory parties, they would be, and you laughed, but this is true, they would be in at the next election.
Absolutely not.
Well, of course they will, because the people of this country, the majority of people of this country, respect and rate Nigel Farage more than any other politician.
That's not true. That's just not true. Nigel comes bottom in trust. And that is what the elections are about. He comes bottom.
The reality is, people must concede, Nigel Farage is the biggest political figure since Thatcher in this country.
More influence on British politics.
And at the end of the day, some people don't like him because of Brexit. I have to say, if you want to blame anybody for Britain voting to leave the European Union, it's Tony Blair for never giving people an opportunity to think about and discuss and have a referendum on any of these things to start with.
Well, he's the voice of the country outside Parliament who has had more influence on a consistent basis over must be touching beyond 30 years now. So his biggest weakness now is that he's actually in Parliament. So he needs to sort of evolve and change and modulate his voice to that.
Well, one of the problems, and Pete points this out, and it is a fact. The problem that you've got in the House of Commons is if you want to speak in a debate, you have to sit through the whole debate, which might be 7 hours. Now, that's fine if you've got 200 MPs. If you've got 5, it becomes a really debilitating factor because you've got to literally sit one of them in all the time. And if it's Nigel, then it really cripples you operationally. I mean, do you accept the argument that Pete's put forward that actually Farage is being undermined by being in Parliament and that he can never have the strength he had outside?
I think there is truth to that. I think also the political system which saw Reform gets so many more votes than the ridiculous Liberal Democrats, but they got 70 MPs, has to be looked at. Because we're not living under a democracy at the moment.
No,
we are living.
Now, by the way, I just want to remind you that today is Saturday, but had it been Tuesday at this time, then we would have just got the result of the Conservative leadership ballot. I think I'm just interested, obviously, Tugendhat going out, not a big surprise.
No.
What about this whole thing that cleverly has pulled ahead of Jenrick?
It's no surprise. Absolutely. Don't forget, he was a Home Secretary, Foreign Secretary. He's a known name. He's an effective communicator. This is what you need in a leader of the opposition, effective communication. You are essentially just there to berate the government again and again and again. Keir Starmer was a brilliant leader of the opposition. Terrible Prime Minister, but brilliant leader of the opposition. So this is what you need, and this is why.
But isn't that the problem? He's had those offices those offices of state. He's had that influence.
And this is the drawback.
I'll tell you what we'll do. Even though
you can then argue that you were constrained by the Prime Minister.
I'll tell you what. As I say, today is Saturday, and that would have been breaking news on Tuesday around this time. So I thought we'd just bring you that. But let's move on. Let's.
And it's down to 2 now.
Oh yes, of course. It's down to 2. Yes. If it was.
No, so if today,
Tuesday, so just to be clear, if today was Tuesday, it would be down to 3. But today isn't Tuesday; it's Saturday. Anyway, Pete, which confusion? Why don't we take this question and move on to the next one? Because this question is: Reform UK has made history by broadcasting the first ever political party broadcast made by what?
AI.
AI is absolutely correct. And now, James, we can talk a little bit about the leadership election because which Tory MP has revealed that he shaves his hands every day?
The one that I don't think should win, and I actually agree with my 2 ordinary colleagues, that James Cleverly is the man to lead the Conservative Party if they can't have Nigel. And he has actually got the persona of a leader. And that's what you need, because you're quite right what you say. It's the personality as well as everything else to be a Prime Minister and to get the public behind you. It is true, by the way, that Jenrick shaves his hands.
Oh, you weaved that in with experts.
He shaves his... Well, anyway, he shaves
Which side of the hands does he shave?
I presume it's the
palms.
It's not going to be palms, is it?
Very worried. Does he howl at the moon? I mean,
I sincerely hope it is in his palms.
There was an old trope about hairy palms, wasn't there? That we won't
What's
repeat.
quite interesting, though, is that for quite some time, Robert Jenrick was seen as kind of the front runner. He was everywhere in the media. He was all over the press, all over the TV and radio, podcasts, absolutely everywhere. At the Conservative Party conference, he was somewhat of the darling. James Cleverly overtook him there. But
I think he'll win. I think Robert Jenrick will win.
It would be very,
I have to say,
it's interesting how none of us have said Kemi.
Gary, well, the problem is with Kemi. I
don't know if she's still in.
A former Tory MP said to me that the problem with Kemi Badenoch is she runs up a hill and then looks round and realises nobody's following her. And I think that's a reasonable point.
She's also a terrible communicator. The number of times this woman has been misquoted is ridiculous. It's not. You're just terrible at putting your argument.
I thought her point about maternity leave was stupid.
It was.
I genuinely think what we should have is some sort... I do accept small businesses, if one person goes on maternity leave, it can be debilitating. You know, we should just bring in some sort of mandatory insurance policy or something like that. Where the government, the insurance policy will pay out. We just spread the risk.
Yeah, it's not something you say at Tory conference either.
Who's resigned under Sunak's government of the 3? I mean, it is Jenrick. He does seem to be the person who's closest.
Yeah, but the problem that Jenrick had, and I'm a bit of a fan of Jenrick, you know, nobody could preside over that immigration service and have a future. So I think he was right to get out of it.
It's also the first one out has the biggest leadership ambitions.
Right.
As a general rule.
Yeah.
And the worst thing you could ever be is the front runner in a Tory leadership race.
He said he had
nothing
nothing in that direction, no ambition in that direction.
Yes. So this is
Okay.
Sorry, carry on.
Okay, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll go to the answer. Which Tory MP shaves their hands?
Generate.
Okay, it's absolutely right. Now, we're going to go for our bonus question. Behind this wall is a safe that for 6 months contained what?
I know.
The Spur James Whale MBE. Right? Because, unfortunately, James Whale obviously got his MBE for services to broadcasting and cancer care and charity, whatever. But there was some concern that you wouldn't, and I'll be blunt, live long enough to collect it. So we had to have a Spur one minted, which lived in a safe for 6 months.
Oh, that's
and
so
actually,
nice.
when it arrived, it was better than the one you got off the king, wasn't it?
It was polished. I am not making it up, okay? Because people keep saying, you look fine, you look okay. And as you know, I am not making it up.
I have to say, the most embarrassing bit of the MBE day was when your oncologist felt obliged to stand up and confirm you were actually dying because one or two jokes were made. But because what happens is your treatment, they get to the end of a treatment and you're supposed to be a goner, and then new treatment gets approved by the National Institute for Clinical Excellence. And that's been going on for 20 years.
Yep. We don't, you know, if I'm terminally ill, I could die tomorrow. I may make this Christmas. My wife just said to me, this is not going to be like the last 4 Christmases. I said, what do you mean? Well, we're not doing it as if this is your last Christmas.
Yes.
I said, well, in that case, it probably will be, won't it? It's really not very fair, to be honest.
That was The Woke That Was. Continues after the break. That was The Woke That Was with Andre Walker.
How many phones were stolen in Britain last year?
Well, walking down the streets out here in London, it always seems like one a person. So that would make it something like 60 million. Certainly, I've been lucky enough. I don't walk around with my phone out, which is unusual.
I beg your pardon.
Phone.
I'll tell you what I found extraordinary, and I don't know if I'm betraying a confidence here, but Mike Graham had his mobile phone stolen.
I read about that.
And what was amazing about this was it had some geolocation thing or whatever. He knew where it was.
He watched it go around London. And
the police failed to investigate. The problem is with all of this, the police go, well, you know, one mobile phone theft is not important enough for a full investigation. Yes, but there's not 100,000 different people doing it. There's 500 people doing it 100,000 times. But they don't seem to be bothered.
With one bag that's absolutely brimming.
Why didn't he follow it and get the bloke or
That's
woman
actually
who did
really,
it?
it could be really dangerous because you don't know what the guy who took the phone actually has.
And it was momentary.
It's actually really
You go
dangerous to do.
prepared.
He was on a bike and he had a hood on and he just went by, picked it up, gone in a flash. So it is, even though there was a police officer across the road, I think.
They actually practice this to be able to take it out of your hand and speed away.
Yeah.
The organisation of these groups is incredible. But what really annoys me...
Another reason to ban bikes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
I'm in that club.
The other thing that they tend to do, which causes additional confusion, is they steal boxes from reputable companies like Deliveroo and Just Eat, so they look like they're takeaway drivers. I mean, a lot of in fact, I'm sure all of the complaints about delivery drivers going on pavements, etc., actually aren't genuine delivery drivers at all. I think people like Deliveroo and Just Eat just get invaded with these complaints about antisocial behaviour, and actually they're as big a victims as anybody else.
Yeah,
but these phone zombies are a real problem as well. I mean, I'm all
What's a phone zombie?
A phone zombie, the person you walk behind on the pavement and they are not looking where they're going, or they're coming the other direction towards you. I'm looking to catch their eye.
I agree.
So do I go left or do I go right?
I think
they're on their phone.
Not the phone out the hand.
I have got so close to doing it. I have genuinely got so...
And when you go and see a concert, or you go to the theatre, or you go to
shut them down.
They're all there with their bloody phones.
Yeah.
They've never seen anything with their eyes.
Yeah.
OK, hang on a second. I've just been told we've got a clip of a phone zombie.
Caught on camera now, and a woman distracted while walking down the sidewalk takes a nasty fall.
Surveillance video shows a utility crew going down to do some work. Then, minutes later, a woman appears down the block, walking straight towards the cellar. Right before she gets to the open door, she looks at her phone and flips headfirst into the basement, about 6 feet below.
That's not very pleasant, is it?
No. If you're going to do that, make sure you've got some decent underwear on.
I don't think she planned it, if I'm being honest.
There's a whole compilation of those. People walking into waterfalls, people falling down man traps, people walking into the traffic. And I mean, it's just ridiculous what people.
I actually got stopped by the police at Golders Green on the basis that my road crossing was dangerous. And I thought, I wonder if you can actually get into trouble for dangerous road crossing.
As a pedestrian?
Yeah, they said, I'm sorry, your performance here was so egregious that we felt we had to stop you.
There is a serious element to this, though, and that's the fact that the police kind of tier crime. You know, like these crimes aren't dealt with as seriously, despite the fact that they actually make people feel probably the least unsafe that they could possibly feel. It's like having your house broken into. Like you're physically assaulted. You know, and the police just say, oh, here's an insurance crime number, go claim it back off your insurance. I'm sorry, that's not what we pay the police to do, and that's not what the police are for.
Yeah, and also, I mean, to give the example of someone like Mike Graham and Alex Phillips got mugged as well. And, you know, this is a man who one would assume can afford a new phone, whether it's insured or not.
Yeah.
But actually, that's not the point. He's been a victim of crime. He's furious about the fact. And it must be galling to say, I can show you the address where it is.
And it ruins, but he couldn't get onto texts, he couldn't get onto emails, no one knew where he was. He couldn't get the text to get the security code in order to change bank details or to shut down bank accounts.
And amazingly, in fact, here's a bonus point. I'm liking these bonuses. What did the police officer that Mike Graham reported his stolen phone to tell him about himself?
He'd had the same happen?
In uniform.
In uniform.
Well done.
In uniform.
So he was wearing his police uniform and somebody half-inched the phone out of his hand. You just think, you've got to just give up at that point.
What do they do with the phone? Where do they sell them?
They send them back to China. They're taken to pieces and made into new phones.
Well, I think we have to get a bit tougher ourselves with criminals. I mean, you know, I'm far too old, but so somebody snatches the phone
and work out what
your
crime
hand.
is.
The biggest
shove
one,
them off their bike.
The biggest one, particularly here in London, is bicycle theft.
Yeah.
It's a huge problem, and you know, I don't really care.
And they do it in the daylight. It is daylight robbery.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
it's literally daylight robbery.
It has to be said that it's often said that every single taxi in Kosovo is a stolen car from the Western Europe. Now, whether that's true or not, there are a large number, but the problem is it's got nothing to do with theft in this country. It's got something to do with, in places like Kosovo and indeed China, the authorities not caring about the vast numbers of stolen goods.
I think you can also make the argument about they don't care here, because if you look at, say, like the broken window style policing, which Rudy Giuliani was very famous for cleaning up New York with, you know, if you'd go after these small level crimes, you reduce the number of bigger crimes.
Do you know what Mike Graham should have done? Right? He should have literally set up a Twitter account under the name of the person who lived in the address that he'd got, and get it to misgender someone. Right?
Well, they don't know what crime is now. It's thought crime or it's political crime. It's not actual crime on the street, taking your bike or taking your phone.
And I have to say one thing. This is the stupidity of all of it. You know, most people, the only time they came across police officers were things like car theft or burglary or bike theft. And the fact that the police now don't come out for that just creates a crisis of confidence in policing. I thought it was quite funny, and I wouldn't recommend doing this, but there was a chap a few years ago who had his shed broken into. I think there was a couple of bikes there and whatever. And he phoned up the police. He said, look, if you get round now, they're literally here. And they said, no, we don't come out for that. We'll come round tomorrow. So he phoned back and said, don't bother coming out now. I've shot them. Right. And then there were 8 police cars and a helicopter with him.
There are ways of getting their attention.
You know, I wouldn't recommend doing that, but I did something similar once. And I lived in the middle of nowhere in Yorkshire.
Yeah.
And I found a couple of blokes in my garden.
Yes.
They reckoned that it used to be a footpath and they were opening it up again. And so I said, no, you're not. I phoned the police Sunday afternoon, and the police said, "Oh, I'm sorry, we haven't." So I said, "Okay, well, I'll just go out and shoot them then, because I'm not having them on my country." Within 10 minutes, the police were there, and I got arrested.
You got arrested?
Well, they got rid of. Well,
they got.
I have to say that my son and I actually ejected them from the property, and they were outside waiting for the police. But I did get taken to the local police station.
I'll tell you what the good news is for people like you, and this is geek fact of the day. There is now a deadline for public footpaths. If you've not registered an old footpath, I think within the next 18 months, it can never be registered again.
Oh, thank goodness.
So to the beardy weirdies out there.
Exactly. I'm talking 40 years ago or something like that. But they wouldn't. It's a Sunday, and I'm saying, well, they've got strange people in shell suits.
They just wander around.
Strange people in shell suits. There's viewers in Liverpool who are quite used to that.
I'll be in front of the Deputy Prime Minister's one of them.
that bibberwhack. She can never live down the Mince bibberwhack, can she? Okay, Tom. Now, I think you're close to getting this wrong. How many mobile phones were stolen in Britain last year?
I read it was something like one every 7 minutes, which is something like 100,000 a year.
So did you just do the mathematics in your head? Right.
There and there.
I'm going to say to you.
I'll tell him the answer.
The answer. Yeah. Well, do you have the answer? Do you know what it is?
78,000.
87,000.
Oh, it's 78,000. But I'll tell you what I'm going to do.
I'm dyslexic, so I was
I think we need a steward's inquiry on this. So if the phone rings from the producers, we can decide on this. Okay, deal or no deal? Okay, so I think the point is, we've decided the following. First of all, the fact you did the maths in your head. Got relatively close, which was quite good. But I think the other thing is we've decided to give you the point on the following basis. Oh. This was a number reported stolen, so it may well be the figure was higher.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
The actual answer, the reported answer was 78,000, but we'll let you have 100,000 because of the way you came up with it in your head. So we'll give you the point. That's absolutely
only
correct.
Points meant something.
Well, yeah, that's right. If only there was a prize.
That was The Woke That Was. Continues after the break. That was The Woke That Was with Andre Walker.
Britain is home to more what than any other European country?
I think this is illegal migrants, and I think it's 745,000. This was done by a report by Oxford University, so you know it's not one of these right-wing think tanks. And but no, this is actually staggering. We've now surpassed places like Germany and France, and it's having a detrimental effect on our society. We also had the crime statistics that were released for the first time. They did certain crimes imprisoned crimes by nationality. You know, and it's found that one in 50 Albanians are technically in prison, and you are 27 times more likely to commit a crime if you're a migrant from another country than you are if native.
Yeah, but
there is a huge kind of social impact on this. But interestingly, if you look at the data that this report goes into about the changing of our population, they actually argue the biggest issue we face is a declining birth rate. They expect this.
Yeah, but the problem is, Pete, we've made this point before. You are not a homeowner. Right? Now, this new idea under the Labour Party, now let's not call it 60-40, let's simplify the maths, call it 50-50. 50% social housing means that for you to buy a house, you have to buy two and give one to whoever wants it. And that could be an illegal migrant, and lest we forget, they're not willing to throw people out for being terrorists. So what could happen is you could literally buy a house for a terrorist to live next door to you.
We're talking about
they already have done so.
And that's absolutely right. Now, ultimately, who is going to have children in that scenario? Because you just can't afford it.
Well, we're talking about a £22 billion hole. Yeah. Well, if you take £150,000 as the cost of a migrant, we've got 750,000. Yeah. We're talking billions of pounds here.
Technically, this report...
Where is the hole? It's the illegal immigration?
It's probably even more, because this report is actually from 2017 and it's suddenly resurfaced. So most people actually think with a revised estimate of 1.5 million.
Well, I've got a question for everybody, because I think this, and any of you can chip in, but I think this raises an important question. Because we have been force-fed this message from the Conservative right and indeed from Reform UK that we cannot deal with our illegal immigration problem as long as we're members of the European Convention on Human Rights. Well, so is every other European country. So why are we top? Because one would assume that if it is just European Convention on Human Rights, then why has Germany or France not got the same problem?
Because we have weak members of Parliament. Yeah. We have weak generally middle-class members of parliament who don't understand. The question I really want to ask, and no one can answer, if we had a land border with Europe instead of the sea, and people were cutting holes in it and breaking in, we'd have the military there stopping them. So why don't we have the Navy in the channel and the boats, and don't start, oh, well, people drown. And well, yeah, so don't get in the water. So why can't we keep these?
Well, I'll tell you what we could.
That we've got more than an invading nation of people. We don't know what they're here
James,
for.
I'll tell you what they do in Australia, which I think is a very, very wise move.
Stick the kangaroos on.
Yeah, the Australian wallaby, mate. They get the Navy out in international water. And what they do is they intercept the boats, they take the people off the boats, they repair the boats, they put the people back on, give them food, and say, sail anywhere you want, but not into Australian territorial waters. Let me tell you, if they hang round and run out of food, or there's a problem with the boat, they get them off the boat again. They repair the boat, put them back on, and give them more food. And they just do that forever. Now, ultimately, the problem that we've got is once they set foot on British territory, they can do all sorts of things. But nobody operates a border policy which is come in first, then we'll decide whether you should have come in. It's just absolutely
We're a soft touch in every way. You know, in in terms of sort of the middle class sort of angsty guilt that we have, but we also give them the hotels. We push them up the housing ladder. We give them they get the rights to benefit.
Why do we do this?
Pete,
why do we put them in a hotel, give them money and food? Why do we do this?
Because we spend £8 million a day on hotels. I have to say, Peter, I don't know the answer you're going to give as this European Convention on Human Rights thing, but I will tell you, I think the reason is not even the integration into British law. I genuinely think that there are a group of bad faith operators within the British legal profession who willfully go to the court filing torturous appeals over and over again that have no merit in order for people who are not entitled to be in the country to stay in the country.
I think you're right, but I think that's targeting the wrong problem. That's targeting something further down the line. This is actually a political problem. This could be solved by changing the law, or by I think we do have to pull out of the ECHR, but I think we can replace it with whatever we want. This is the bit of having a sovereign parliament. We can write our own laws. The reason we don't pull out of the ECHR is because governments are terrified of Guardian columnists and these kind of
nobody reads the Guardian.
That's
no, don't.
But this is the thing. They're still terrified.
I agree with what you're saying because I think that there are more and more countries in what I call the European dictatorship than we realise that want out.
Well,
and we're seeing that in Italy.
Pete, let me just say this to you. Let me just say this to you, Pete. When we talk about, the European Court in Strasbourg, whichever one it is, the European Court of Human Rights, it has ruled against the British government on the basis of, I think, prisoner voting and other things. We have won the better record. But the point is about the European Court of Human Rights. It is advisory, right?
And that's actually the answer to the original question for James, is why do we pay attention to it? It's because we choose to pay attention to it. Most other countries don't. Say France, for example, just ignore most of it and go right ahead.
I mean, I think I agree with the thing about the lawyers.
This is quite interesting. You can link it to the Chagos Islands thing, is that now we have a Prime Minister who cares more about international law than domestic law.
Yes.
And I think that is that. We have a human rights lawyer, so that's
the water he's swum in all his career.
All his career. And it's a word, kind of one, your point, Andre, is where all these other human rights lawyers exist, is because that's where the money is now. What you do is you fix this politically and the legal problem disappears. But like I said, that's never going to happen under Keir Starmer. But interestingly, in the actual report, it names this kind of border force thing that the Labour Party want to do, or they now set up, as one of the reasons that they're actually going to fail to stop the boats, because it undermines all other efforts. It just focuses it on one. And as I've continued to argue, this is a piecemeal problem. You have to fix this bit, and this bit, and this bit, and this bit. And then you actually get an actual policy that works. This silver bullet policy is absolutely...
I'm going to give you a fun fact about international law. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist, right? If there are a body of treaties that we've signed which we can unsign, and let's remind ourselves of some of the interesting treaties that we've ignored. My favourite being the Treaty of Utrecht, which at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, we decided that British people, and this is what it says, are able to trade with French and Spanish people as if they were French or Spanish themselves. Now, Has anyone reminded the European Union of the Treaty of Utrecht? The reality is, we sign these treaties, large swathes of it get ignored by other people, and we sit there in the Inns of Court going, this is a body of international law. Yeah. No, it's not. There's no international parliament. There's no real international court. There's no international government. Yeah. It's nonsense.
It's also the fact that the European Union don't even listen to their own laws, for God's sake. It's like they've never had their own kind of fraud investigations ever signed off. They aren't a rules-based organisation, because look at what they did for the German economy. They just continue to bend the rules, and you have all the useful idiots running around saying it's a rules-based organisation. It's not, and you're an idiot.
And when they roll it out, they always say, don't worry, Parliament will be sovereign. Yeah. Well, let's live that. Yeah. Let's make that happen. Let's make Parliament
I'll tell you one thing that made me laugh about the whole Brexit thing. We're going to move on in a second. But this whole thing where when the EU used to say, you know, Britain can't survive without us, I thought they were making like a sort of generic point. What they were actually saying was, no, we've literally met your politicians. They're absolutely hopeless.
Yeah, that was the thing. We took back control and gave it to the economy.
We realised,
I've got to be honest with you. One thing that we can all agree with Brexit, at least it's shown us how good our politicians are. It's not been great to watch, but it has been. OK, anyway, what has Britain got more of than any European country, Pete?
It's illegal migrants.
And for a bonus point, you've got the number.
745,000. This was in the original report. Most think it's 1.5 million now.
Whoa! That is absolutely correct. OK.
How many people have we got in the armed forces?
Not enough.
70,000, I think.
70,000, yes.
And
going down.
I've got to say, James, I worry about the armed forces because I think there's so few people that are doing far too much work, and there's a lot of PTSD and mental health problems. Yeah. And of course, I warn you, anybody who wants to go in the military, I guarantee you, if you are left homeless as a result of a mental health problem, you are on your own, pal. Believe me, there is no support whatsoever. OK, so James, the final question. NHS bosses in Wales, oh God, here we go, have told a fish and chip shop they must start selling what?
Well, as somebody
Pickled eggs.
As somebody who is in and out of the NHS on a very regular basis, the people who are doing the medical treatment are amazing, really good.
Yes.
The management are complete and utter. It's just useless.
Nonsense, yeah.
You know, the amount of bureaucracy, the amount of... makes the work of the doctors and the nurses, the clinicians, everybody that works, so much more difficult. And somebody has got to have the nerve politically, probably none of these politicians, to actually improve and move the NHS up to the 21st century. But this ridiculous NHS in Wales has said that a fish and chip shop needs to sell more fruit and veg. I mean,
well, chips are veg, aren't they?
Of course. How are you going to force a fish and chip shop? Mushy peas. What's wrong?
Mushy peas, tomato sauce. I mean, you've got
hang on. Tomato sauce is a fruit.
Oh my! I get that wrong every time. I get
fruit and veg. So
we got both.
There you go. Mushy peas and ketchup.
No, there is a moment on this where you sort of have to wonder, why is the head of the kind of local national trust getting involved in business regulations, and he's doing it on the grounds of, you know, the tourists, because he's right near
a health board.
It's a health board or something like that, and they're now telling what a business can and can't sell. I think that's a really dangerous precedent. Yeah. And what annoys me the most is we could have looked at how Labour run a national health service by looking at Wales and how terrible it is, and yet we all voted for them. Well, we didn't really, but this is we're giving the keys to the Labour Party.
I think the NHS has got wrong. They're trying to ban people from smoking outside hospitals. Yeah. I have to say to you, having walked past hospitals multiple times, they are a strong advert for not smoking. Yeah. You see these people and you go, that doesn't
I'm giving up tomorrow.
It's like just 14 people all advertising.
The problem is they may not have very much time left, and probably the doctor will say to them, well, if you want to do it, you know, not going to make any difference. I don't think there should be smoking outside restaurants or pubs. I had to have a word with somebody the other day, because if you want to smoke, I have no problem with smoking. Smoke. But we should have smoking dens.
Yes,
because of the passive effect it has on other people.
Areas, didn't it?
Yeah, I don't want to sit in a restaurant and somebody sit next to me and light up while we're outside. They got very embarrassed.
But I mean, your point about...
Can you imagine, sorry just to say this, can you imagine you're out for dinner, you've got your fag, and someone's kicking off, and it's James Whale?
Yeah,
I mean, that must be like, people must be like, sorry, was that mushroom stroganoff magic mushrooms? Or is that actually him?
But if the health board is getting involved in fish and chip shops, then doesn't it work the other way around? Shouldn't the fish and chip shops be helping to sort out some of the problems you just laid out, Jay? They're probably better at the management.
I think you're
Well,
Oh, I tell you what, I think that's right. So the National Chip Shop Federation have said anyone could run the NHS better. We're up for it.
Down the same lines.
James, what have NHS bosses in Wales told chippies they need to start selling?
More fruit and vegetables.
Absolutely correct. OK, so congratulations to James Whale, who wins the quiz with 4,852 points. Tom comes second with 80 points, and Pete, unfortunately, only got 5. And if you think there's any fairness, rhyme or reason to those scores, you're very much mistaken. Until next time, goodbye.